Okay, good morning, everyone. As Robin said, my job this morning is to frame the issue and provide some context for what you'll hear throughout the day. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what we know about the housing instability and homelessness among youth aging out of foster care. I'm going to begin with just a little introduction here for those of you who are not entirely familiar with this population. What we know is that the majority of children who are placed in foster care do achieve permanency. Either they're returned home to their families, they're adopted, or they're placed in legal guardianship. However, there's a percentage of young people who do not achieve permanency, and they end up remaining in foster care until they age out, somewhere between 18 and 21 years old, depending on what state they live in. This graph here shows you the number of young people who have aged out of foster care over the past decade. As you can see, the number peaked about 5 or 6 years ago, around almost 30,000 young people aging out each year. It's declined since then. For the most recent year we have data, in 2012, it was about 23,500. So although it's been declining, it's still a substantial number. What do we know about the characteristics of these young people? Well, like most, as with the foster care population in general, they're disproportionately youth of color from low-income families, and the majority of them entered foster care because they were neglected or abused. There's a lot of variation among this population in terms of their foster care histories. They enter at different ages. Some come in as young children, others don't come in until they're adolescents. They vary in terms of the types of placements they experience. Some are placed with relatives, some are placed with traditional foster families, some are placed in group care. They also vary with respect to the amount of instability they experience while in foster care. Some have relatively stable foster care histories, maybe with one kinship care home. Others move from place to place over the course of their time in care. And then finally, there's also a lot of variation with respect to the services they receive. We also know from some research done by some of my colleagues, including Mark Courtney, who's also here this morning, that there's a lot of heterogeneity within this population with respect to distinct subgroups. So there are some young people who are very successful. They go on, they get jobs, they complete their schooling, they go on, they marry, have families. And then there's other young people who are really struggling, young men particularly who get involved with the criminal justice system, young women who begin parenting at a very early age. So there's a lot of heterogeneity. What do we know about the outcomes of these young people? Well, from both some research that I have been involved with as well as some other research, we know, as I said, we know some of these young people successfully transition into adulthood. However, as a group, these young people tend to fare more poorly than their peers. And this is true across a variety of domains, whether you look at educational attainment, employment, receipt of public assistance, criminal justice system involvement. For example, we know that these young people are more likely to experience early parenthood, more likely to get involved with the criminal justice system, more likely to experience economic hardships, and we also know more likely to experience homelessness. In terms of housing outcomes, finding housing and staying housed are among the biggest challenges this population faces when they age out of care. We don't have any good national numbers, but we know from a number of different studies that the rate of homelessness is high. Estimates range from as low as 11% to as high as 36%. And this variation reflects a variety of factors. So there are differences in the time frames over which people have followed these young people. There's differences in the geographic regions. Different samples are more or less representative of the population. And different studies have defined homelessness in different ways. We also know from this research that not only do a high percentage of these young people report being homeless, but we also see high rates of couch surfing and also residential instability soon after leaving foster care. This next slide shows some data from the Midwest study. For those of you who are not familiar with the Midwest study, it was a study that Mark Courtney started back in 2002. I've been involved with the studies since about 2004 that followed a sample of over 700 young people transitioning out of foster care from 3 Midwestern states, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Iowa. And this graph here shows you the cumulative percentage who reported being homeless as we interviewed them at different points in time. So as you can see, back at age 19, 11% reported having experienced some homelessness. And this increases over time until age 26, when the cumulative percentage is 36%. We also know something about the predictors of homelessness, and this is also from some data from the Midwest study. We looked to see what factors were associated with an increase in the risk of becoming homeless. And as you can see, some of the factors are delinquency. So young people who reported engaging in more delinquent behaviors were more likely to become homeless. Having symptoms of mental health problems, a history of physical abuse, having a history of running away while in foster care, and placement instability. So these are all factors that were associated with an increase in the risk of homelessness. We found some tentative evidence that one of the sort of protective factors was having a close relationship to an adult family member. That seemed to have a protective effect, reducing the likelihood of becoming homeless. As part of the literature review that Anne actually mentioned that we did as part of this project, we looked at a number of the factors that contribute to housing instability among this population. And we broke them down into 3 categories. So there's individual youth characteristics, and these are things like inadequate income and assets, lack of capital, physical and mental health problems, early parenthood, having a criminal record, and not having a family safety net like young people in the general population often do. There's also child welfare characteristics. Get that out there. These are characteristics of the child welfare system. For example, inadequate preparation for independent living, lack of assistance during the transition to adulthood, and a lack of cross-system collaboration, something that Jennifer actually mentioned. And then finally, housing market conditions. So things like the general lack of affordable housing, long waiting lists for public housing and Section 8 vouchers, as well as housing discrimination in the marketplace. So why does all this matter? What makes housing so important during the transition to adulthood? Well, a couple of reasons. One is that housing instability can really impede young people's efforts to become self-sufficient. So for example, if your housing is unstable, it's more difficult to go to school, more difficult to hold down a job, more difficult to find employment. Housing instability can also compromise other aspects of well-being. It can contribute to poor physical and mental health, for example. And that gives you a good sense of the framework for where we are today, and I'm happy to answer any questions people have.